All right. Greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here in a new studio, it seems. I hope you guys find it up to par with the type of conversation that we're going to have today. With me today are Monique Taute and Ernst Roets, who are currently in the US as part of AfriForum's The World Must Know campaign. And, well, I'm going to find out where in the US specifically they are now, because I know a lot of people are asking. A lot of people seem to be under the impression that they're jumping from state to state. But let's see what's going on. Hello, Monique and Ernst, can you hear me?
Yes, hello Ernst.
Hi, hoe gaan dit?
Nee, het gaan goed, dankie.
Boy, ek groet jou. I'm greeting you like some of the Americans we're meeting here can speak a little bit Afrikaans, and then always when we say hello, they say, hoe gaan dit? So that's the greet here.
All right. So, yeah, let's lead in with that question. Where are you guys specifically? Where in the US are you currently with the campaign?
So our trip started in New York, where Ernst had a great interview on Fox News. It will be airing soon, and we'll be sharing that on social media as well. But we are currently in Washington, D.C., where we have had a lot of meetings with the US government, as well as with other role players. Like one of the people that we met with was David Keane. He's the former president of the NRA. So we are meeting with interesting people. We've also met with some of the representatives of the House as well as the Senate. So we are speaking to people in Washington and on Capitol Hill about the situation in South Africa.
All right. So when you look at the bigger picture, will you be focusing on staying in Washington for the rest of the campaign then, as I understand it?
Yes, we will be in Washington until the 3rd of March, and then we'll be coming back to South Africa.
All right. So another thing that I saw a lot of people were interested in is they were pretty much curious about what the Americans know about South Africa. Now, I know last time I talked to Ernst, that was also a question. A lot of South Africans were curious, do Americans actually know what is going on in South Africa? But I have a bit of a different question this time, and it's rather, can you see a difference in terms of how Americans, how much they know about South Africa since the last time we were there? Has the amount of awareness about South African politics increased? Is there increased interest? Is there any type of difference you can see since the last time we were there?
Yes, that is definitely the case. So we've been here a few times, and I remember, especially comparing this trip to 2018, when I was also on Tucker Carlson's show, the most significant difference between this trip and the previous trips is exactly that people are much more aware of what's happening in South Africa. We had, for example, a meeting with the Heritage Foundation here in Washington, which is, at least in my view, the most influential political think tank in the world. And the person we spoke with was their expert on Africa and sub-Sahara Africa and so forth. And we gave him the report, and it was quite clear as the conversation developed that there was very little in the report that he didn't know already. So I do know we were very impressed with the Heritage Foundation and the knowledge that they had about the situation in South Africa. But also, we haven't met anyone during our trip so far. Remember, we're not meeting with people on the street. We're meeting with the State Department and think tanks and researchers and so forth. But we haven't met with anyone so far who doesn't at least have an extent of a picture about what's happening in South Africa. Everyone knows that expropriation without compensation is a thing. Everyone knows about farm murders. So that's certainly the case, although there's still a lot of questions that people have about, some of the nuances and so forth. And the discussions we had, and I think that's the great thing about where we are currently with this campaign, comparing this to previous trips. And I'm sure Monique could confirm that the discussions we had was very little of it was about what's going on in South Africa. Most of the conversation was about, okay, what are we going to do? So what is AfriForum doing, and what should the US do? What should the US response be to this? What should the US position be on this issue, and so forth. So I think in that sense we have made a lot of progress as a result of previous tours, but I think particularly during this tour, we are making significant progress in terms of getting the message out and so forth, because the foundations have already been laid. We're building the house now, and I think that's good news.
No, that's very interesting, seeing as the previous tours to the US, you could definitely see the big focus was getting information out there and informing people. But it's interesting to hear that actually now that shifted to, there seems to be a higher level of being informed about what's happening in South Africa. And it seems like the Americans have almost moved to the next step in terms of how do we respond to whatever is happening. So were you prepared for this type of response, or have you been, in terms of do you have a whole arsenal of things that you are telling them that can be done in terms of policies or responses?
Yes, so the campaign, as we've said, we did expect this because we've been liaising with our contacts in Washington over the last few years and so forth. And so the campaign, when we announced it, when was it, like 20 January or something, when we published the report, we said that this campaign is built on 3 pillars. And the first pillar is what we've been doing for years now, is to raise awareness about the situation in South Africa. But to raise awareness is crucial. It's as I said, to use the house metaphor, it's the foundation you need for the house. But getting people to know about what's happening in South Africa, that alone doesn't achieve anything. So the second pillar of the trip was to get people not only to know what is happening in South Africa, but also to take a public stance, to write about what is happening in South Africa, for journalists to do news reports about what is happening in South Africa. But more than that, also we can talk a bit about the State Department. I'm sure we will. Speaking with the State Department, speaking with think tanks and representatives on Capitol Hill, not only to inform them, but to get them to take some form of a stance. And then the third part of this trip is to get people to become involved, especially people who, ordinary people, so to speak, who live abroad, who are interested in South Africa, who are concerned about South Africa, to become involved in some way by doing their little part. And if we can get for one person to send an email to his local newspaper to tell them to do a story about South Africa, that alone doesn't achieve much. But if we can get 1,000 or 10,000 people to do that, then it would have a massive impact. And I think that's AfriForum's speciality, and I think it's been AfriForum's strongest point in the last 10 or 20 years, is the ability to get people on a large scale to sign up to something and to become involved in some way and to do their little part. I mean, we know this. In South Africa, we have more than 10,000 volunteers driving patrols with AfriForum and so forth. So I really think, I'm not concerned about this, because I don't think it's not like it's this massive mountain that lies ahead of us and we don't know how to get there. We know how to do it, and we are doing it, and we've started doing it. So I'm very optimistic about the outcomes of this tour.
Right, and then talking about how you're going about it, what type of approach or angle are you taking when you approach, for example, American politicians, and you need to convince them that minority rights in South Africa is actually an issue that they really need to care about? I mean, if you look at the campaign as a whole, it's an election year in America. So how are you approaching that issue specifically?
Well, the fact that it's an election year is both good and bad. There's always something. Every time, I think this is my 3rd or 4th time to Washington, and every time I've been here, you would speak to people and then they would say, wow, this is a crazy news week in the US at the moment. But the point is, every week is a crazy news week. So you always have to, that's the challenge. I think one of our challenges is to get through the clutter and to get through the noise. And now we have people here, there's primary debates going on, and there's a bunch of local political issues, and there's some really important things happening in the news, and we need to get our message through all of that. And it's difficult, because a lot of that are things happening in the US, or things that people in the US are aware of or are talking about and so forth. And I think you need to have a multi-pronged strategy, and I think that's what we've been doing, and we've received quite some success. But I think the important thing, if I can maybe expose or divulge a bit about our strategy and I think our winning formula here. The most important thing to do this is networking, is meeting people, having a meeting people, having them put you in touch with more people, having coffee with people, having lunch with people, talking to them about the situation, coming back, talking to them again, building a relationship. It's very hard to just speak to someone who you've never met and have a 30-minute conversation with them and then expect them to be an activist for your cause. So some of the people we are meeting here, that's a great thing. Some of the people we are meeting here are people who we have never met before, which is good because it means the network is expanding. But some of the people are people who we have met 2 or 3 times before. And some of them have said, for example, yes, this time they're going to write an article about what's happening in South Africa. So it's a multi-pronged, multifaceted strategy.
And then also just from there are different perspectives to anything. So I'd like to ask you and Monique, what so far, the tour is far from over, but what has been the highlight so far in terms of maybe a personal highlight and then something more connected to the cause or the campaign itself?
I think we had an excellent meeting with the State Department. That was extremely successful, and it was clear that they know exactly what's going on in South Africa. Another highlight was definitely Ernst's interview on Fox News. We are excited to share that with you guys. We're still waiting to hear from the producers when it will be aired here. But as soon as it's aired, we will be sharing it on social media. So that will definitely be a highlight once that is published.
All right. Ernst, do you have any other highlights that you personally saw that you think was a big impact?
I think Monique is right. I think the State Department meeting was a very good meeting. We regarded it as a successful meeting. And then of course some of the interviews. I see the I-24 interview. The I-24 interview has already been published. I shared it on Twitter. The link to the full interview, which went very well, and it was well received. There's also going to be an interview by the Daily Caller. They interviewed both me and Monique about what's happening in South Africa. It's supposed to be published sometime soon, maybe today or tomorrow. They said probably early this week, but they can hold it back if they want to. So it's like a package. It's not simply an interview. I believe what they will do is they will add some stock footage in and some stats and make like a news package of the whole thing. I think that went very well. And then actually when we finished with this discussion, we're heading over to Voice of America. Their studios are on Capitol Hill. It's right next to the Senate building. So we're heading over to Voice of America for a live interview there. So we've done a bunch of media stuff, and there's some stuff that lies ahead. There's going to be a column, an opinion piece in the Washington Times about what's happening in South Africa, and we're meeting with a bunch of others. And then the Capitol Hill meetings are important. So the difference, just for the viewers to understand, is there's the State Department, which is you can call it the Department of Foreign Relations, of course headed by Mike Pompeo, who reports to Donald Trump, and many people regard the Secretary of State as sort of the second in command, reporting to the President. So you have the President, and then you have the Deputy President and the Secretary of State, which is Mike Pompeo. And he's running the State Department, so that meeting went well. But then other than that, there's also the House and the Senate on Capitol Hill, or around the Capitol buildings. And they each have their own focus. But within the House and the Senate, there are foreign affairs committees. And so our focus here is to speak to the people who are on the foreign affairs committees. And we've had a few meetings, and we're speaking to Republicans and Democrats. And so far they went well. What we are trying to achieve is to get the foreign affairs committee. One thing is we're trying to get the State Department to make a public statement about EWC, which we had. And the other thing is to get the foreign affairs committees to make some form of a stance. It's a bit more difficult. It's a bit more tricky because you have to convince a whole group of people to vote about something. So it's a very difficult thing to achieve, but I'm excited about it because it's a very difficult goal, but it's not an impossible goal. So that's something that we are working towards.
So, Monique, if I understand correctly, a lot of people are asking still, where's the best place to get updates on your tour, seeing as it's still going on? Would that be social media, your own personal social media? Where would you suggest people if they want to get like the latest updates on what you guys are doing over there?
So we have a website, it's at theworldmustknow.co.za, where people can read more about what we are doing. But we also we update the public on our social media platforms, on my Twitter account as well as Aaron's Twitter, and then also we have our AfriForum social media platform. So that's from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter, and we are keeping the public updated on all platforms. So if you're interested in some of our reports, what we are saying in America, you can go get that report on our website. We published a report just before we came here. It's called, I actually have it here so you can see, The World Must Know. It was a report we published at a media conference, and that's basically what we are saying to people that we speak with here on this side.
All right, no, excellent. And let's get a bit more to current events, because a lot of things have actually been happening in the news since you've been there that have influenced your tour. For example, Mike Pompeo speaking out against, very vocally coming out against EWC in South Africa. I'm sure it has influenced your tour. Can you enlighten me in any way how that has influenced the campaign over there, and if it has actually helped you in any way?
Yes, so I think in the last few years there has been two major developments coming from Washington regarding, there's been a few, but let's say the two, I think maybe 3 or 4 major developments coming from Washington regarding making the world aware about what is happening in South Africa and also getting more public pressure. The one, I think the first thing was probably that the initial interview with Tucker Carlson, which, as I'm sure the viewers know, it's one of the most watched news programs in the US and in the world for that matter. And we do know that it's a show that Donald Trump, the president, watches. And he often tweets. So he watches Tucker Carlson tonight, and then often he tweets about what he sees. So that, I think, was major. It was a big event. And then that was 2018. And then later, a few months later, Tucker Carlson had a follow-up show segment about South Africa. After which Donald Trump tweeted. He made that, very notorious tweet. People in Washington still laugh when we mention that tweet, because we know in South Africa, when Trump tweeted about South Africa, it had this major reaction. But it also had a major reaction in Washington. So when you mention Trump's South Africa tweet in Washington, people immediately know what we're talking about. Like the town was figuratively on fire as a result of that. And I think that's part of the problem with US politics is how divided they are. So if Trump tweets something, then some people would say, well, this has to be a massive problem. We need to respond to this. And some people would say, this has to be a hoax. He has to be lying. So that, I think, was massive. And then the other thing that really had a significant impact was the comments by Mike Pompeo about, what was it, a week ago? Because, I mean, he's, as I said, second or third in command for all practical purposes. His job is to position America in the rest of the world, to look after US interests on a global scale. And he's part of the very close inner circle of President Trump. And for him to come out publicly making a statement as strong as that, I think he used the word disastrous. To say this policy could be disastrous for the South African economy. It had a significant impact, and all the others. So the State Department, I'm sure they discussed it beforehand, but the State Department reports to him. He's leading the State Department, and the different ambassadors and people across the world and so forth. So, and we do know the reason why this is important is not simply to get people to talk about South Africa. One of the main reasons is, we know, we've said this many times before, but it's important to repeat, that the ANC works on what they describe as a strategy of balance of forces, which basically means they put out something that's very radical or very socialist, and they see the reaction. And if there's not pushback, then they continue. And if there's a little pushback, then they might fight a bit and see if they can push through with it. And if there's significant pushback, they reconsider their position. And I think Pompeo's comment had a massive impact on the balance of forces in South Africa.
No, it's interesting that you mentioned the balance of forces, because there's something else that just happened today that a lot of people in chat are also talking about, and that is the US ambassador to South Africa, Lana Marks, also talking about EWC, but her remarks were a bit to the opposite side to what Mike Pompeo said. She said that she was very satisfied after talking to, I think it was to Cyril Ramaphosa himself, about what land expropriation will entail, and she was very satisfied with what she heard. And she is assured she assured us that there will be no expropriation of private property in South Africa. Would you mind giving me your thoughts on this very recent development now in the context of the balance of forces?
Yes, so we saw that comment, and I wasn't able to read. I don't know if she made a speech. I only saw a news report, and I was a bit concerned by that, because I'm not sure if she was quoted correctly. But I think there's a few things to be said there. The first is we must remember that an ambassador's work and job is to foster good relations between the two governments. So that's her primary duty. That's what she's appointed to do, is to make sure that she has a good relationship with that the US and the South African government has a good relationship. And that's something that we support, because we want trade agreements between the US and South Africa. It's in all of our interest. But I mean, the issue is not, as far as we can see it, the issue is not really is EWC a thing or not. The current debate is would this be good or would this not be good for the South African economy? So I'd like to get more context. We would like to get more context, but I think two things are important. Firstly, that we shouldn't expect of the ambassador to be an activist for or against a particular political position or policy position. But then on the other side, as I said, we had a good meeting with the State Department, and I think we must see the comment within context. I think it's important for us to establish a good relationship with the ambassador, and we would like to meet with her as well. If she's doing her job properly, what she would do would be two things. She would foster a good relationship with the South African government, at least in terms of her public comments. But then she would, in private conversations with the South African government, she would point out to them where the US is concerned. And in her reports to Washington, she would point this out as well. So if she's campaigning, to use that term, which is the wrong term, or if she's taking a stance against EWC, the point of this is that she would have to relay that to Washington, and we would see some form of a stance coming from Washington. But we'd love to meet with her. I think we have written to her, and we'll do so again to see if we can meet with her. Maybe after this trip would be the appropriate time to organize a meeting with between AfriForum and the ambassador.
Right. And then something else that I actually would like to discuss is the whole idea behind, it's more of a broader idea, the idea behind international campaigning. Because I know the majority of AfriForum's campaigns are domestic, but what is the big motivation behind going international? What is the big benefit for AfriForum and its cause to talk to, for example, not only America, but this whole The World Must Know campaign? What's the thought process behind it?
The short version thereof is that the reason why we are going abroad is to influence local positions in South Africa. That's the short version. It's not simply to tell people about what's happening. That's important because that's the first step. But the point is to get people abroad to take a firm stance, and there's an opportunity here in the sense that the US, or not the US, the South African government is extremely sensitive to international criticism. They aren't used to it. They're used to being, the poster child of the world and the party of Mandela and all of that. And now when they get criticized on an international platform, it has a significant impact in South Africa because they don't know how to deal with that. And we've seen that in the past at UN conferences and so forth. So it's to influence the balance of forces in South Africa. That's the primary thing. But I think there's also an important thing with this trip about, we do know that the trade agreement between South Africa and the US is under threat. And we want that agreement to remain intact. We don't want to have it cancelled. It's going to be bad for everyone if the agreement goes down. So instead of saying to the US, let's fight EWC by initiating sanctions against South Africa, or let's fight EWC by cancelling the trade agreement, we're doing actually the opposite. We're saying, let's fight EWC by using the trade agreement as a way of pressuring the South African government, or putting the South African government on terms to say, we have an agreement with you. The agreement stipulates that you need to protect private property rights and you need to promote a free market. It seems like you're not doing this currently, or you're moving in the opposite direction. So let's stick to the agreement. If we continue with this agreement, the trade impact on South Africa would be the following. And here's an opportunity for you to keep this agreement intact by proving to us that you can stick to the agreement. That would be the ideal outcome, I think, for everyone. So that's part of the reason why we're here. It's also to an extent to influence US politics, to use that term, but particularly US politics towards South Africa. We're not interested in influencing local US politics.
And then also talking about international and domestic, what has AfriForum done to, I think we've done a lot of reaching out in South Africa to try and talk to the President and Parliament. Can you just name some instances of where AfriForum has tried to initiate dialogue in South Africa to do it domestically?
Well, there's been a lot of things that we've done in South Africa. I think the most notorious one was the presentation we did in Parliament. Other than that, we submitted 2 bills this year, or 2 commentaries, 2 bills published by the government about expropriation without compensation. We are talking to the government. We were particularly involved with the public hearings regarding expropriation without compensation, organizing people to attend the meetings, getting people to speak at all of these meetings, getting people to send their submissions on expropriation without compensation to Parliament, which we succeeded by the hundreds of thousands. There were hundreds of thousands of people doing this through AfriForum's, as a result of AfriForum's campaigning. And so there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that we still have to do in South Africa, but that's the main focus. The international focus is additional, is an add-on to that.
Yes. Yeah, because I think the main point that I also just want to make is that I'm fully aware that AfriForum has reached out and tried to have, the first plan A was to have dialogue in South Africa, but if the parties that we reach out to are not interested in talking to us, then you go to plan B and you talk to the people that actually want to listen, which I think forms part of the World Must Know campaign. And if you look at the launch of the World Must Know campaign earlier this year, there was talk of other countries. Could you give me more information on that? Like what other countries are on the horizon for AfriForum in part of this larger campaign that I think a lot of people are curious about?
So we are planning to take this campaign basically to all the continents except Antarctica. We will, as the year goes on, we will be publishing the places and the campaigns that we will be launching. But we can confirm that it will be on various continents, and we are very excited to take this campaign international. We have already now done our American tour, and yes, we are planning tours in the places in the rest of the world as well.
And you would say, compared to, for example, earlier tours, I think, we've been in, AfriForum has been in the US twice now, this is the 3rd time. Compared to previous tours, this one, in terms of scope, are you meeting more people? Are you meeting more influential people? What defines this tour so far that distinguishes it from the previous ones?
I think this has been the biggest international campaign that AfriForum has ever done. So I think we have reached new heights. We have had more meetings this time around, and I think the climate also has changed for us internationally. So we are very excited for what will still happen in the future. Yes, but this trip has been very, very successful thus far. Even if you just see all the media interviews that we've been having, the meetings that we we have access, all the people that we have access to now, the picture looks much different than a few years ago. Something exciting also that we haven't told the public yet is that we will be attending CPAC this year. It actually starts today, so we'll be joining CPAC later today. CPAC is the largest conservative conference, I think, in the world.
Yeah.
So we are very excited, and that will also be a big networking opportunity for us. Actually, President Donald Trump will also be speaking at CPAC, so we are looking forward to hearing what he has to say.
I'm just imagining you standing there in the crowd listening to his speech with like a sign advertising the cause. But will you be, while you're walking around there at CPAC, do you have anything there that you'll be catching people's eyes with, or engaging people in discussing about South Africa? What will you be doing? Basically, my question is, what will you be doing with the regular people, the influential people aside? When you talk to someone, a regular citizen in America, about South Africa, what do you think is the most important?
So we will be talking to the public, attending CPAC. We have a few badges that we will be handing out and just telling people about what's happening in South Africa. I think there's a big movement in the world, or if you look at African countries, a lot of African countries are looking to China, and they think that socialism can still work. And that is something that people in America feel very strongly about. People here feel strong about a free market. They are pro-Western values, and that's something that is being threatened in South Africa at the moment. So we are looking forward to speak to people at CPAC, and I think we'll be able to grow our network there as well.
No, excellent. And I think that's also an important part that a lot of people maybe don't see as important, is that talking to regular people. I mean, talking to the influential figures is definitely the big focus, but then talking to people on the ground as well, because from looking at my own social media, a lot of Americans and a lot of other countries as well, the regular people seem very interested in what's happening in South Africa, even though it doesn't really affect them in the bigger picture. They still care about what's happening here, and they are curious about, and they are hungry for information. So that's why I think that these types of the World Must Know-esque tours are actually very important. And looking at the bigger picture now, if you look at the World Must Know campaign in its entirety, do you think that there would ever become a point where, or do you hope that there would ever become a point where this type of international campaign would no longer be needed? Or do you think there's always a place for just keeping people informed, even if things back home aren't going as dire maybe in the future?
Well, I would go even further to say what we are hoping is that we would reach a point where we have to shut down AfriForum, because then to reach a point where AfriForum isn't needed anymore. So maybe if people rail against AfriForum, some of these ANC or AF supporters, we must shut down AfriForum. The best way to shut down AfriForum would be to protect minority rights in South Africa, because then we would be redundant. So I think ideally we would love to reach a point where international liaison is not as important as it is now. I think realistically speaking, it's only going to become more and more important. What we need to do, and that's the type of discussions we are having in AfriForum currently, is to say what we need to do now is basically build a department of foreign relations. We're not the state. We don't have as much resources at the state. We're not as the state. We're not going to have a government building with hundreds of people working on foreign relations, but we can maybe. It's possible to appoint more people. It's possible to look at people internally in AfriForum, look at their job descriptions, who's working on what different aspects of international relations, what is the strategy, update our international campaign strategy, and work on that, and have people work on getting information, have people work on PR, have people work on the campaign side of it, have people work on the administration side, which is something that we shouldn't neglect. And the different aspects, building the network and so forth. I think that's what we need to be doing. Realistically, I can't foresee international relations becoming less important for AfriForum, or AfriForum spending less time on it in future. Also, in terms of globalization, the world is getting smaller, so to speak. there's more and more people who live abroad who are interested in South Africa or concerned about South Africa. There's so much that we still need to do. We need to get such people. We already have the DieWêreldMoetWeet network, where people who have left the country or who are just interested in South Africa can sign up and stay updated. And then we also have Friends of AfriForum, which is a network where people can it's almost a way of becoming a member of AfriForum if you live abroad. So we're already doing that. So there's already a lot that we are doing, but I can foresee us doing more. Maybe just a general comment about your previous point about talking to ordinary people. That's something that we also regularly discuss at AfriForum in terms of what is the strategy. And you can have a shotgun strategy or you can have a sniper strategy. And sometimes it's better to have a shotgun strategy, in other words, to try to get the message out as far and as wide as possible. And sometimes it's better to have a sniper strategy. And the sniper strategy is to say, this is the person who we need to reach. This is the talk show that we need to get on. And we're going to do everything. We're going to spend significant time and energy to get to that, to achieve that goal. And so we need to have a balancing act between making sure that we speak to as many people as we possibly can, like people on the street and so forth, as opposed to making sure that we get to particular people. But a great way, sometimes you can do both of them at the same time. And I think a good example of that is the Fox News interview and other media interviews as well. Fox News is a good example because it's so big in the US. It's like twice as many viewers as CNN, for example. So if you get on a primetime show on Fox News, the consequence thereof is that millions of ordinary people, become informed about this. So we can talk to people we can go out and start talking to people on the street, and it's not a bad idea, but we can spend an hour and we would have spoken with 10 or 20 people. So I think a place like CPAC is an excellent place to do that, because that's people who are already politically inclined, people who have spent the time, who have paid the money to attend. So that's a brilliant place to do that. And so it's a balancing act. Sometimes we need to have a shotgun approach, and sometimes we need to have a sniper approach.
And just a bit more of a light-hearted question. Have you had any conversations with people on the ground just regarding South Africa? Not even necessarily the serious stuff, more just have you had any just normal conversations when people heard you are from South Africa so far? Is that still something for the future that you're hoping for?
So we will be focusing on that at CPAC. Something I just want to mention is that the support for AfriForum's causes have grown tremendously. So now I think our membership is over the 235,000 members that we have, and this makes us the biggest civil rights organization on the African continent. So this empowers us to do international campaigns like The World Must Know. So we actually just want to thank all of our supporters. We've received a flood of support for this campaign since we've arrived in the States. So that empowers us to do campaigns like this.
And just a small thing that I also see a lot of people ask about is, for example, when you or Ernst do interviews, it's not always immediately published by AfriForum or spread by AfriForum. Why is that? Why is it not immediately available when you do an interview? Can you just explain that?
So a lot of the interviews that we have been doing is pre-recorded. So it's not yet published here in America or anywhere. So as soon as it is published here, and a lot of the time the news networks then publish it a day or two later on YouTube, and that's only when we have access to the video stream, and we then publish it on all of our platforms. So I know there's a lot of hype around Ernst's Fox News interview, but we actually haven't seen it ourselves yet either, because it hasn't been broadcast at all. So as soon as any interview is broadcast, we make a great effort to share it on our platforms.
Maybe just to add to that, we actually prefer pre-recorded interviews. It's the reason in the US, and the reason why is the point I mentioned earlier, is there's a lot of stuff happening in the US. I remember last time we were here, we had an interview on Fox News that no one's ever seen, because it was broadcast. I think it wasn't it wasn't published on YouTube. So we had, this was actually my third Fox News interview. The second one on Tucker Carlson Tonight, which of course is the flagship show. The other one was with Todd Starnes. And that interview, I think that one was actually live. We pushed through with the interview, but the problem with that, it was on the day on which the Notre Dame was set on fire. And so we were doing the interview as the Notre Dame was burning, and it was obviously all over the news. So the benefit of having pre-recorded interviews is you are not as dependent on the news cycle and not so much at the mercy of the news cycle, because it's recorded before or after the live show. And then also the benefit of that is when it's a bit of a slightly more quiet time on the show, when there's not some massive news report, something happened with Trump's impeachment process, or something happened with some Democratic debate, or Bernie Sanders said something that's massive or whatever. When there's a bit of a quieter slot, they put that in. So that's also good for us, because we firstly, because in terms of getting the interview, our chance of success or our prospects of success is bigger, but also in terms of getting it on at the right time is also good. So sometimes it might be that we get back to South Africa and then only then does the Tucker Carlson interview get published. I believe that it's going to have a big impact. I think some people in South Africa are going to be very excited about the interview, and I think some people are going to be very angry about the interview, because we spoke quite frankly about what's happening in South Africa. And I mean, we also said what's the problem with what the South African government is doing? What should the South African government be doing? And what should the US be doing in response to this? So I'm sure that one would have a big impact.
I see just a few people in the chat asking about the report itself, and I just wanted to make a little bit of a disclaimer that the full report is available in the description of the stream, so you can just go check it out there. There is a link to that. There's also a link to the website of The World Must Know, so all the information you need is right there. And then a question related to that is actually a question coming in from Don Barnard. He asks, Ernst, are you also talking about farm attacks and farm murders, or are you only talking about EWC? Basically, he's asking what are the things that you're touching on, and are you talking about farm murders?
Yes, that's another example of, do we go with shotgun tactic or sniper tactic? So the report is about almost everything. I really want to encourage people to read the report. The report is pretty wide. There's a section on BEE, there's a section on minority rights in general, there's a section on language discrimination at universities and so forth. There's a section on farm murders, there's a section on hate speech, there's a section on expropriation and so forth. So we need to decide when we have a meeting, do we say, listen, there's 20 things we need to discuss with you, or do we zoom in on one or two? And so what we do is, depending on who we are meeting with, that depends on what we will be discussing with them. We will also mention to them and say, well, there's a bunch of other stuff that's in the report that you should take note of. So what we do literally is, before every meeting we have here, we have our own little meeting, like a preparation meeting, to say, what is it that we want to achieve with this meeting? Who are we meeting? What is this person interested in? What are the topics that we're going to discuss, and so forth? So with some of the people we have spoken with, there's a strong focus on farm attacks. I also have copies of my book here. I've handed out quite a few so far. And with some of them, the focus is almost exclusively on EWC. But it's actually hard to talk about, especially when you have an hour conversation. It's hard to talk about EWC, expropriation without compensation, without farm murders and land grabs and these type of things coming up, because they are related to an extent. It's about the threat with regard to land in South Africa, or the threat that farmers face in South Africa. So these issues come up, but as I said, depending on who we are speaking with, that would to a large extent depend on the extent to which we discuss different aspects of the report.
Right. And then are there any specific topics or parts of the report that the Americans seem particularly interested in that you've noticed?
Yes. Expropriation without compensation is a massive thing that they are quite interested in. And something that we are discussing, and it came out, I think that's going to be part of the reason why the Fox News interview is going to be a shocker to some people, is we actually spent a lot of time talking about China and what China is doing in Africa. So that is a part of the focus. Yeah, there's a lot of questions currently in the US about what's happening in with regard to China's activities in Africa, and the US regards China also as a major threat. And we do know, we had a press conference about this, was it last year or the year before, about the Akkerland boerdery story. So shortly what happened there was the owners of the land, of the farm, was given, I think they were given 7 days to hand over their keys to government. And of course, EWC, the constitution hasn't been changed. So what government then did, the Department of Land Reform told them that they will be compensated at 10% of market value. It was a massive farm. It was worth like, I think, 200 million rand around there. And then government said, well, we're going to compensate you at 20 million. Then it transpired that that farm is not very far from one of these special economic zones that China is heavily involved with. And China was developing a coal plant, and this farm had a lot of coal reserves below the surface. So the whole issue with Akkerland was government was trying to get its hands on that property as soon as it can to provide China with access to the mineral resources or to the resources below the surface. And that's something that when you explain that to people in the US, you can see how, you know, the eyes open up, and because what China's doing is a major concern to the US. So yes, I think that the China side is something that certainly is part of our agenda in terms of putting that on the table.
Mm. And now, except for CPAC, is there anything else that you can disclose in terms of that lies ahead still on the rest of the tour? I think there's still half of the tour left, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. So we will be attending CPAC. CPAC's going to start today, and it's going to be until, I think, Saturday. We're not going to be there the whole time. So we're going to do CPAC, and then we're going to come back and have meetings. So when we're open, we're going to attend CPAC for a while. CPAC is going to be big, and just we have to spend time there because we're going to meet a bunch of people at CPAC. And we're going to attend the what's it called, the congressional dinner.
Yeah, so we were invited by the organizers of CPAC to attend a congressional reception that will be happening tonight. So that will also be a great networking opportunity for us. Then we have a lot of meetings. Actually, next Monday, I think we have like 4 on one day, and that includes other people, senior people in the government offices. So we are excited about that as well, but we will keep you updated on social media when that happens.
Part of maybe something to add in terms of who are we still going to meet with. What we learned from experience is that it's not a good idea to publish a list of everyone we're going to talk with. We haven't done that before, but just as a way of framing it, and say these are all the people we're going to meet with in the next week. Because what has happened previously, and we were able to confirm this in 2 different ways, is that the South African government has had a deliberate, what do they call it, a counter-information campaign to try to do 2 things, to counter what AfriForum is doing with information, in other words, getting people to talk out against, trying to discredit what AfriForum is doing. And the other part of it is trying to cancel our meetings. That has actually happened. The South African, the DIRCO, the Department of Foreign Relations in South Africa, of International Relations, actually called people in Washington and asked them to cancel their meetings with us. So we do know that there's that happening, and we do know, as I said, there's this campaign or this attempt to provide counter information. In other words, to say, well, no, it's not really a problem. EWC is not a problem at all, and farm murders is not a problem at all, and AfriForum is exaggerating, and they're not really going to take the land. We have confirmation that they are doing this. So it's better for us to have the meetings, and we ask people during our meetings, depending on who we are meeting, are you comfortable with us saying that we met with you? And sometimes we have meetings with people and we don't even say that we met with them, just because of this, to make sure that we need to be smart in how we communicate and what we communicate, because we know the South African government is trying to discredit what we are trying to say.
No, that's very interesting, and I think that's a very smart strategy, actually. But then, as a whole, from the the time that you've spent there now, the people that you've talked to, have you been filled with hope? Have you been filled with encouragement or excitement for the future? Has it been a fruitful tour, you think, so far? This first half so far?
Yes, I think the good part is we are very hopeful. We are very optimistic about what is happening, and it's for several reasons. One is the fact that our network in the US and in Washington has grown substantially. That is one side of it. I think the other side of it is how people are just more informed about what is happening in South Africa, and the type of comments we had now with Mike Pompeo and the Fox News interview, and I think an important part, Monique mentioned this earlier, the fact that we can say to people, we have 235,000 members. I mean, if it wasn't for our members, none of this would have happened. Firstly, because we wouldn't have had funding to do this, but also, if you send an email to someone and say, listen, we'd like to meet with you, we represent 230,000 people, 235,000 people in South Africa. That's basically 250,000 people. And that's only the members. So oftentimes we know we would have a family, like the husband would join or the father would join, and then the family would regard themselves as members of AfriForum. So it's safe to say that our support, it's not only safe to say, I know it has been estimated already, that our support is in the millions in South Africa, and that it opens a lot of doors. So that's, I think in that sense also we are very hopeful. We can see in terms of what we're doing, who we're meeting with, what the outcome of the meetings are, that our influence or at least our significance is growing. It's easier to get meetings now that was very hard in the past. It's easier to get people to take you seriously. It's easier to get media interviews, and a lot of that goes back to the support that we're getting from our members.
So, Monique, question for you. How can people in South Africa, South Africans that are still here, and people abroad, or South Africans that have immigrated, how can they help this cause, or this cause specifically, and then how can they help AfriForum in the short term and the long term?
So people in South Africa can, well, there's a few ways they can support us. Firstly, they can become members of AfriForum, and this empowers us to do this type of campaigns. They can also support us on social media to help us to spread the message. So that, I think, is a big role that the public can play actively every day, is to follow us on Twitter, follow us on all our social media platforms and share the message. I think it's also important for the public to also take a stance from their side and make sure that they have the right arguments if they're confronted with some of the issues that we are seeing, so that they can also help us to spread the message. People outside of South Africa also have a big role to play. They can join Friends of AfriForum, which is a platform for people outside of the country to support us. And they can also actually write to their media platforms, write to their state representatives to ask them to take a stance on some things like EWC in South Africa. So I think anyone who supports our cause have a role to play. So we would encourage people to use the platforms that they have.
Right. No, thank you very much for coming on and giving me all this, and for the listeners as well, giving me all this information. To each of you, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to end this off on going forward?
I think maybe just a final thought. I think what Monique said now is the important thing. It is important for people also to become informed. It is, and people to consider how they frame their arguments, because, I mean, sometimes you can support a cause in such a way that it does damage to the cause. And I'm not saying that this is a major problem. We see it sometimes. We have some people to the left and to the right who would try to do things apparently, or who, I don't know if it's deliberately or not, to discredit a good cause with bad arguments. But we need more people to talk about this, and Twitter, I think it's two things, and they might sound contradictory. Twitter and Facebook are not, and YouTube and Instagram and all of those are not the real world. Philip Bayes has this saying. He says to have lots of likes on Facebook or lots of followers on Twitter is like having lots of money in Monopoly. It says something, but it's not the most important thing that we should be pursuing. So having said that, so firstly, we must remember social media is not the real world. The real world is out there, and we need to do stuff in the real world. But having said that, Twitter and Facebook and all of these things can be a very, very effective platform for spreading the message. And I think a lot of people are doing this already. And I think we can do that more. I think we can be more effective on social media. Obviously, we want more people to join AfriForum because we have budgets and we have limits in terms of what we can do. And the more members we have, not only does it influence the budget, but it also, we want to say to people, we have 250,000 members. We're almost there. Or we want to say to them, we have 300,000 members or 500,000 members, just because it opens doors for us that have been closed before. So I think it's important for people to join. And if they live abroad, they can join Friends of AfriForum. I think it's just friendsofafriforum.com.
Yes, there's a link in the description for people that want to join.
Yeah. So I think there's a myriad of things that people can do and that people are already doing. And we want to thank people for the support that they've been giving us. It really is the reason why we are in this position, to be able to attend CPAC and to be able to have meetings with the State Department and with people on Capitol Hill and think tanks, and also why they take us seriously.
Monique, your final thoughts?
We just want to say thank you for the great support that we are receiving. And also, we want to encourage people to interact with us on social media. We always read our feeds before we go on interviews like this one, so that we can answer the right questions. Sometimes on our side, we don't necessarily know how the public, or if there's questions from the public, we need to know that so that we can address that as well. So I see, this platform is a perfect platform for interaction with the public as well. And I know that you also have a great focus on addressing issues that the public wants to know. So we just want to say thank you, and thank you for the great discussion, Adams.
Thank you for coming on. And then just the final word to everyone that tuned in. I know this is a very awkward time in South African time, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but I think you'd rather watch this type of conversation than watch the budget speech. But this interview will also be available into the future. You didn't miss it if you didn't see it live. It will be available on my channel, so you can share it and rewatch it, or watch the part if you didn't view the entire thing. And then, thank you for everyone that tuned in. Thank you for everyone that liked the video, that shares it and subscribes, and everyone that helps get the word out, whether that be sharing the AfriForum, the World Must Know content, using the World Must Know hashtag, or DieWêreldMoetWeet if you're Afrikaans, or just giving AfriForum a voice by defending us when we are criticized on social media, or when someone attacks us. We always have an army of supporters and members that are right there to have our back, and it's really encouraging. I hope you have an excellent afternoon, and thank you for tuning in. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you very much.